Story 1. The dad in the 90s was an alcoholic sheet metal worker. He's sober now, but my friends and I were swimming when he came home. He stumbled into the backyard and flopped into the pool fully clothed, with work boots. He was floating face down like a corpse. I asked my friend if we should get him out. He seemed unconcerned, saying his dad was a scuba diver and could hold his breath for a long time. The mom came out yelling at the dad, who just started blowing bubbles face down. I left.
If you ever have a hankering to write a screenplay, you have your opening scene.
There's nothing weird about this. I bet it feels amazing to be able to relax so completely and float after a hard day of work. No, hi, honey. No putting away the dirty clothes. Just get home and celebrate getting off work.
That's Harold and Maude. It opened with Harold face down in the pool and his mother doing laps.
Story 2. I went to my friend's house when I was a kid. He did something wrong, and I watched his dad pick him up by the throat and pin him against the wall.
I had something similar happen. I was at the house of a classmate when I was in first grade for a school-related thing a bunch of our parents were working on together. I was downstairs playing with this kid's sister, and he kept coming down there to bother us. She eventually went and told on him. And when their dad came inside and yelled the kid's name, you could tell he was scared as fuck. He ran downstairs with us. His dad came to the top of the stairs and used his "you better get your ass up here now or else" tone. As he very slowly and reluctantly climbed to the top of the stairs, his dad picked him up, closed the basement door, and threw him up against the other side of it. He hit him in the face or slammed it against the door or something. He was bleeding from his teeth or mouth when he was made to come back downstairs and apologize to us for bothering us. I immediately went upstairs, outside, and told my parents what happened, and we left right away. Unfortunately, we had to continue associating with his dad for a bit because of this school function. But after several years, his wife left him, thank goodness. She clearly had an eating disorder, and I'm willing to bet he had been abusing her as well.
My mom had a friend who had a daughter around my age, so we got set up on playdates and we tolerated each other. When we'd play pretend or anything really and I didn't want to do what she wanted, I would get choked, so I would do what she said. I was never afraid of her, but yeah, I'd get choked. I kind of chalked it up to an experience every kid goes through. I realized about 25 years later that that actually isn't normal. Not even a little bit. It made me sad for younger me that I never told my mom, but it made me feel worse for that girl. That's a learned behavior.
I had this and the choking too. I remember my head being sore for a couple of days after. No one ever stepped in, and my parents are still married to this day. When I had my own child, it brought me to a completely different level of realizing this was horrific abuse. I can't imagine doing this to my child for any reason.
Story 3. I went to a friend's house for a sleepover. She had old bowls of unfinished food all around her room. Some had collected maggots and some had a lot of flies. Smelled really bad. I didn't sleep in her room. I slept in her brother's room, where he tried to fuck me. He was 15 and I was 12. I left.
Having grown up in a very similar situation, $5 says the brother was doing that to your friend.
Her brother killed himself over a girl 1 year later. She had a teen pregnancy, gave the baby up for adoption, and had another baby 2 years later in an abusive relationship. I lost contact with her purely because she didn't engage in keeping conversations going with me. I don't know, but I hope she's well now.
Cool. From one room of horror and neglect to the other one. Sorry you had to experience that, my dude.
Story 4. A guy I knew insisted on showing me his new handgun. I'm not much of a gun guy, but fine. I'll admire your new gun. While showing me how to chamber a round, the muzzle crossed in front of my body. I held up my hands and said, "Hey, whoa, take my money," really meaning don't point your damn gun in my direction. I figured the message would be clear. A minute or two later, he did it again, and I suddenly remembered an urgent appointment.
A friend of mine accidentally shot someone in the head at a party this way. There really are guns out there that fire on their own, and there are multiple lawsuits over it. For example, the SIG Sauer P320.
Story 5. I met someone at a rather sketchy bar, and she invited me to her place deep in the forest. It was a trailer, and when we got inside, I noticed that all the interior doors had been removed, with sheets covering them instead. There was no power, and a couple of steps in, it felt like I almost fell through the floor. I noticed a few spots sagging from water damage. I have to admit, I was still tempted to see where this was going, but the feeling that this looked like a place you get murdered in a horror movie was stronger. So I pretended I forgot something in my car and sped off.
Better off bending over a tree stump at that point.
Bro had a date with the Blair Witch and bailed.
I would have been out after deep in the forest. Maybe I'm just overly cautious, but that seriously sounds like a place where you'd wake up the next morning in an ice bath.
Story 6. The bathroom. It was the worst thing I had ever seen. The filthy tub was filled with dirty clothes that had solidified into a black, foul-smelling gunk. The floor was beyond filthy. Used Q-tips everywhere. No toilet paper and no toilet seat. I stayed there until I got someone to drive my sister and me home, but one of the kids who lived in the house was actually lying on the filthy stuff in the tub as I left. My sister and I still speak of this house to this day, and it was well over 40 years ago.
Reminds me of the one time I visited my close friend's house. I don't know how to say this in a kind way, so I'll just say it bluntly. She was morbidly obese and always had a strong, unpleasant smell. I was used to it and liked her as a person, so that didn't really matter to me. But I'd always assumed it was just due to improper bathing habits. I got to her house, and it was unthinkably dirty. Dirty dishes everywhere in the kitchen, to the point that there was no counter space. The floor was so dirty that I could feel the grit through my socks, and my socks had turned black on the bottom by the time I left. The bathroom had holes rotted through the ceiling and floor. The tub was full of random junk. The toilet was literally solid brown and black on the inside. She also didn't warn me that her entire family, mom, dad, grandma, grandpa, and 2 cousins, live there, and that her cousin has special needs and is very pushy. I totally would have been fine with it and still visited if I'd known. I was just completely blindsided by him and didn't have time to prepare myself for a large grown man wanting to hold onto my arm and pet my head the whole time I was eating. So that made me really uncomfortable. I didn't know to expect any of it, and I was 15, so I'd been driven there by my friend's mom. I was too embarrassed to call my mom to pick me up or to ask my friend's mom to drive me home, especially since it was a 40-minute drive. So I just ended up eating food cooked in that very, very dirty kitchen and sleeping on a towel laid on the very dirty floor. It wasn't very fun.
Story 7. I was installing security alarms back in college in Wisconsin. I was told there was one room they specifically wanted every kind of sensor in: motion detector, glass break, window, and door sensors. I walk in, and it's a literal shrine to Hitler along with a ton of Nazi memorabilia. I say, sure, no problem. Go out to my truck and just leave. I called my manager and told him what was up, and he said we wouldn't be sending any other technicians out there. I will also say the whole vibe of the home was fucked up to begin with, starting from the front door. Crazy amount of Egyptian stuff around, Knights of Columbus and Freemason items scattered about. The whole place gave me the willies.
One of my dad's quite liberal friends has a lot of Nazi memorabilia, books, newspapers for Nazi Germany, and so on. That's pretty freaky, but here's why. This guy's dad had fought in World War II for the Allies, then stayed on in Germany as a peacekeeper after the war. All the Nazi memorabilia back then in Germany was super cheap, and he was fascinated, so he started collecting it. 80 years later, it's like a little museum in his son's basement.
Freeman stuff? You mean Freemason? If so, that person may have collected stuff at yard sales and flea markets, but I assure you they weren't a member. The teachings of the Freemasons are exactly opposite of what Hitler stood for, and we're proud of the fact that we were one of the first groups banned in Nazi Germany.
Was this in the Santa Clarita Valley? Because you just described a house my old apartment made special rules for. We would have liked to blacklist the address, but the multinational, multi-billion-dollar telecommunications company I work for likely wouldn't allow it.
Story 8. My ex kicked me out of the house, rightfully so, and I didn't have anywhere to go until an old friend said I could stay at her place. She wasn't there, but she said to let myself in. I walked in, and there was trash and dirty diapers everywhere. Plates of old food on the stairs and in the bedrooms, trash piled ankle-high throughout the whole place, and oh God, the smell. I walked out with my suitcase and told her I found somewhere else. I haven't been back since, though she invites me over every time we see each other out and about. Story 9. I went to a party once while I was in high school. We had some beers in the backyard around a fire, just hanging out. I went into the house to use the bathroom and saw a couple of guys snorting lines with guns on the table. The vibe inside was way different from the chill outside, and it just felt bad. I used the bathroom, grabbed my friend, and we left immediately. The house got raided by the cops about 2 hours later, and a couple of people got arrested. So, I'm glad I listened to my intuition.
You know they blamed you, right? They're probably out there to this day, trying to hunt down the nondescript high school kid who walked in, yelled AWOGA, calmly peed in the bathroom, and then ran the fuck out.
Story 10. Their parents were fighting hard, throwing stuff at each other. I was a child. I just wanted to go to my friend's house to play. There were other kids crying. I immediately said to myself, maybe another time.
This was my family. My dad bought us, my sister and 2 brothers, Monopoly to play with the neighborhood kids, and then went out drinking. We didn't want to play that, so my mom went and got a Scrabble or something. Dad came home wasted, saw we weren't playing his game, and started beating my mom because his game wasn't good enough. The neighborhood kids hid with us under the bed in my and my sister's room while we all cried. I have flashbacks of her screams that night and the blood covering her face.
I mean, I would probably save my heartbreak for the kid who's actually living in it full time, not the one who sees it for 2 minutes.
Similar situation. I was like 10 or so and had not experienced a household with physical abuse. I went to my buddy's house to play, and his parents got really into a physical fight. I was scared to death and started leaving. I remember being halfway through his yard, looking back to see my friend sadly sitting by the front door. I remember staring for a moment, then going back and sitting down. After a while of shaking, we did what kids do. Started talking about Nintendo. We were friends for a really long time and sort of grew apart over 35 years. I wish him the best. He ended up good.
Story 11. I lived in an apartment. Many times when I was coming and going to work, the lady who lived next door would be sitting on the floor outside her door. I would always stop to say hello or ask if she was all right. I had found out from management that she was a highly educated professor from one of the Ivy League universities, but she had suffered a mental breakdown. One day, I was coming home from work, and she was waiting at the elevator for me in a total panic. She had to show me something. She took me to her door and told me to leave all my electronics outside. She opened the door, and I stepped inside to see that every square inch of her apartment was covered in tin foil. She then went into a rant about people spying on her, showing me a bottle of Mrs. Butterworth's pancake syrup and explaining how it was watching her. That night, we contacted her family, and she was in the hospital for a few weeks after that.
There's a homeless guy near my work. We found out he used to be a professor or something. He had a mental breakdown. He'd walk around the industrial area with a piece of chalk, writing equations all over the sidewalks. As time went on, the stuff he wrote made less and less sense. You could see his mind deteriorate.
My dad had a friend who was a researcher working for NASA when he was young. Super smart guy. My dad had his IQ intelligence quotient tested as a kid, and it was around 135. He said this friend made him feel like a baby trying to put a square peg in a round hole anytime he tried explaining anything to him. The friend started using methamphetamine to fuel his work and actually managed to be totally functional doing that for several years until he had a breakdown and got fired. I never met him myself because my dad liked him but didn't fully trust him enough to be around kids. But my dad's stories of visiting him are wild. After his breakdown, he had to take mental competency tests occasionally because he was still doing some work for the government. I don't know the details, and even though he really was nuts, he always passed because he had memorized the normal responses to the questions. He spent his time after NASA working on inventing things he really shouldn't have had access to, like the laser lawnmower he made, and then promptly accidentally set his truck on fire with. At one point, he was the owner of the largest spotlight legally obtainable by a private citizen in the world. He got it taken away from him after he shined it at too many planes. He died a few years back from the methamphetamine.
I used to do computer security work, digital forensics, etc. I had one client, a minor, untenured professor of sociology at some unknown college, who had me scan her phones and computer for proof that the North Korean government was in cahoots with her department head. Neither she nor the department head were Korean. They were supposedly spying on her to deny her tenure. I knew this was a bullshit paranoia case, but hours later, I took the phone out of the Faraday bag, and she called me 30 seconds later, screaming that she had a tracing app, and because it started sending her signals again, she knew I had taken the phone out of the Faraday bag, and I must be working with the North Koreans too. I told her I had a conflict of interest and couldn't finish her case, so I returned her deposit payment. That really sent her over the edge because the conflict must be the North Koreans.
Story 12. I walked into a party hosted by a coworker, one of my early inside sales day jobs, and she and a couple of friends were snorting cocaine off the kitchen counter. We weren't making much money at this job. Several people in the living room, who most definitely didn't work with us, were watching everybody like hawks. I lasted roughly 3 minutes and left without saying anything to anyone. Overwhelming bad juju in the air. Found out later the out-of-place guys were her dealer and his gang-affiliated friends. Fucking wild. Story 13. Her dad had his machete collection out and was sharpening them. He was talking to them like they were his friends. It was really bizarre. The guy was obsessed with knives and blades. We decided to play at my house that night. Eventually, that guy tried to kill my friend's mom with one of the machetes, and it was a whole ordeal. I lost my friend overnight. Her mom moved her away and didn't give out any contact details.
Okay, this one is the worst so far. I hope justice was served.
Story 14. I was asleep on the couch. I woke up to my friend's dad leaning over me, just staring at me. I got up later and called my parents to come pick me up. Soon after that, my friend told me that his father said, "Your friend cannot come over anymore." I was in junior high school and I am male. Yep, dodged that bullet. Turns out the guy's dad was arrested a few years ago for child pornography.
Your friend cannot come over anymore. As in, the dad was not allowed to be near minors due to a court order? Or, as in, he was attracted to you and felt he couldn't control himself.
The second option was always my guess. I still heard of kids staying over there, but I never went back. I don't want to get into timelines too much. As a result, my kids will probably never attend a sleepover.
Story 15. I met a stranger through a temp agency at a job site that didn't quite pan out, so we hung out for the rest of the day. He started getting drunk immediately, 9 in the morning, but I was driving and didn't really mind. We went to his house and it was nice and clean. Effort had clearly been put in to keep it that way. I was around 21 at the time, and this guy was well into his 40s. Anyway, shortly after we got there, his wife came home and started screaming at him, threatening to call the cops, and reprimanding him for bringing this white boy into my house. They both were black and I'm white. He was yelling back, throwing insults and threats, and telling me to stay. I told her she had a lovely home and thanked her for having me over. I don't know if she heard me. She was screaming at him the whole time, and I promptly left. I always thought that dude should have left as well because she was making it quite clear that he was not welcome there, but it didn't seem like he was listening.
I wonder if she hates him because he drinks, or if he drinks because she hates him. Either way, they don't sound like a particularly happy couple.
Story 16. I didn't leave immediately, but I wanted to. All of the doors were locked from the inside, and only their dad had the keys. The neighbors invited me inside because I'd lost my house keys. We watched the original Star Trek for a bit because that was apparently one of the shows they were allowed to watch. Nice enough people, but complete weirdos in hindsight.
My parents put chain locks on the outside of our bedroom doors to keep us inside through the night. I'm apparently dramatic for considering this abuse. We weren't wild teens sneaking out to drink or anything. We were kids between the ages of 4 to 10.
I think this is really messed up, and I would never dream of doing this to my kids. But the number of times I've heard other parents joke about doing things like this has shocked me. Apparently, it's a thing, and I just can't understand it. What if your kid has to go to the bathroom, or is sick, has an emergency, or is even just scared?
Our parents told us to bang on the door if it's a real emergency. Otherwise, Don't drink too much water before bed, and use the bathroom before bedtime. Being scared didn't matter. Toughen up and stop waking up the whole house. They were sick.
Story 17. In high school, at my friend's house, they had like 5 or 6 Shar-Peis. The smell. Oh God. The smell. I left as soon as I could and never went back.
I once went into the apartment of a friend of a friend. It smelled horrible, in a way I can't even begin to describe. The strange thing was that the place looked tidy on the surface. There were none of the usual sources of nasty smells. No babies, no dogs, no very elderly people. No trash or rotten food visible. Meanwhile, the friend's father was sitting at their dinette drinking whiskey at 4 in the afternoon. Then one of the other kids came home. The father started berating him because I told you never to go over there and talk to those N-words. Then he sent him to his room, grounded indefinitely. Meanwhile, the 3 of us preteens were sitting in the living area, maybe 6 feet away. This apartment complex was probably 90% black. Who else were the kids supposed to be friends with? After that, I was more careful to quiz my friend about where she planned to go hang out. I never wanted to set foot in that apartment again.
Story 18. The nude photos of his wife on every wall in the apartment. Right after he'd introduced me to his wife. Awkward.
Reminds me of a place we quickly noped out of while house hunting. There were sexy, scantily clad, very suggestive glamour photos of their clearly underage teen daughter displayed in the staircase, upstairs hall, and the master bedroom, which incidentally had LED lights around the ceiling. Nope. I still think about that poor girl. I hope she's okay.
Story 19. Picked up a girl for a first date. She invited me in, sat me down with her dad, and he asked if I wanted a beer or two. Then he even asked if I wanted to watch the Playboy channel while waiting for his daughter to get ready. Felt like a setup to get his daughter pregnant and out of the house. I got out of there quick. Never saw her again.
Wow, that's the opposite of what it's usually like meeting the dad.
Story 20. I was a Chevrolet Astro van driver. There's apparently a following for this. I met a fellow Chevrolet Astro van owner on a dating app, and we met for coffee. They wanted to show me their van. When I got in, I realized it was gutted with only a bare mattress, toilet paper, and a bucket in the back. He was living out of it, not in the glorified van life way. I got out promptly and went home. Story 21. Nazi memorabilia is displayed everywhere. His absent father is German, and for some reason, he associated this German side of himself with Hitler's Germany. It was his way of honoring his culture, even though his father was never really part of his life. His father lives in Florida, while this person lives in California.
I hear you're racist now. Father? Should we all be racist now? What's the church's position? I'm so busy down on the farm. I won't have much time for the old racism.
Story 22. When I was a kid, my dad was taking me to a new friend's house for a playdate. When we walked in, he saw a gun just sitting out on the table, completely unsecured. We turned around and left, and from then on, I could only play with that friend at my house. Story 23. I went to dinner at a family member's house, and they fixed the plates for everyone. I asked them not to put peas on my plate because I hate them, and I was told, "In this house, we eat what's served." I was a grown woman, so I walked out.
Totally unrelated to the original post subject, but it's great to finally meet someone who hates peas as much as I do.
It's totally weird to begin with, not to pass the food around and let people fix their own plates.
I had a roommate who had a dog who would gently pick the peas out and set them next to her bowl.
Story 24. More like what I didn't see. When I realized the owner was a paranoid, armed criminal. I gave a younger teen a ride home from an event once, as a teenager, and he invited me in. It was his mom's boyfriend's house. We went down into the basement to check out his video games or something, and he casually said, "Don't go in that back room. We're not allowed back there." About 5 minutes after we entered the house, I heard a car arrive. The door slammed open, and a male voice yelled, "Who the fuck is in my house that I don't know?" The kid got wide-eyed and started explaining while the stepdad stomped down the stairs, glaring at me and interrogating, "Who are you? How do you know him? What are you doing here?" Then he turned back to the kid and said, Did anybody go in the back room? Did he see anything? After he calmed down a bit, I excused myself and left. The kid never talked about exactly what was going on there, because snitches get stitches and end up in ditches. I assume he was either growing a lot of weed. This was a long time ago when it mattered, or trafficking hard drugs. The mom broke up with him not long after. Story 25. We went to dinner at my daughter-in-law's parents' house. There was a cat turd on the stove.
And everyone was just normal about this?
Story 26. In 1970, I went upstairs to use the other bathroom at a party. I saw a guy preparing to shoot up in a bedroom. Spoon, lighter, strap around his bicep. I did a 180 and shot right out of there. It was the first and only time I used the $20 bill my dad made me wear inside my bra for a taxi.
My first job as a teen was working as an assistant at a lawyer's office. The main guy had a son who was studying for the bar exam and working there as a paralegal until he passed. I was 16 and he was 24, and he made me super uncomfortable. He only said a few weird things, but it was mostly his body language and the way he looked at me that made me feel unsafe. The staff bathroom was down a hallway and past the son's office, so I'd have to pass his usually open door every time. He'd usually look me up and down in a way I really hated, so I tried to avoid looking in there at all. One day, I walked past, and the door was more closed than usual, but still cracked and completely dark except for a tiny light near the floor. I broke my rule of not looking in his office and glanced in, and there he was passed out on the floor next to a lit candle and a spoon. I didn't really know how to deal with that or how to tell anyone, so I just quit. My parents couldn't understand why I'd give up that opportunity, but I was too embarrassed to tell them that I was afraid of the son or that he was an addict. I finally told them, but only after the son got sent to rehab for a bit. His dad wouldn't loan him money, so he decided to fill his dad's classic car's gas tank with water. His dad caught him mid-act, sent him to rehab, and the fact that he was an addict became public knowledge. I started working at that law office again when I was 18 and quit again after only a month because the main lawyer, father of the addict's son, started looking me up and down and making uncomfortable comments about how I looked just like a prettier version of his ex-wife. He'd call me away from my desk when I was busy and have me come sit in his office with the door closed and ask me about my dating life. My long-distance boyfriend was very close to driving 5 hours just to beat his ass before I quit.
Story 27. Yep, I went into a client's house, and there were roaches crawling everywhere. I've never been more repulsed. Story 28. My ex's house. Dog shit and the stink of pee in the living room and dining room. Then there was a pile of festering food and dirty dishes in the kitchen.
Okay, this one is gross. I can relate to it in some way. Went to a sleepover at a friend's house in high school, and when she showed me the bed I'd be sleeping on, I had literal tears in my eyes. The mattress was soaked in cat piss. Her mom laughed it off while chugging a beer. Meanwhile, my friend, always perfectly put together at school. Surreal doesn't even cover it.
Story 29. Masses and masses of cheesy porn on VHS. Literal walls of them stacked up by the TV. This was my dad's place too, by the way.
I went to my friend's uncle's place once for some reason. He wasn't there, and we didn't realize that the hundreds of VHS tapes around the room were dub porn until we decided to watch a vampire movie. Old Uncle Chris, what a perv.
Oh my God. At 22, I met this guy on a trip, then went to visit him back in the States. The man was 26, and his walls were covered in Sports Illustrated swimsuit issue covers. Reader, I slept with him anyway. 15 years later, it still makes me cringe.
Story 30. Went with my friend to another friend's house for some herbs. The friend of a friend had another friend over who took it upon himself to show us his newly acquired, unregistered firearm. Trigger control was not being maintained. I suddenly remembered that I left my money in the car. We were out sans herbs. Story 31. I went to visit a buddy who lived in Jacksonville Beach with my wife. The three of us went to a couple of his friends' house before we went out. This couple had 3 St. Bernards. I kid you not. There were huge piles of dog shit all over the place, and this was a huge, nice home. My wife and I still can't believe it.
And a St. Bernard poops like a horse? Or a cow? Or a horse and cow combined? That's insane.
There's an episode of It's Me or the Dog where three girls live in the same house, and their four small dogs just poop and pee everywhere. It's astonishing what they were willing to put up with. One of them literally left her two dogs in her room all day, let them poop under her bed, and then didn't even clean it up. Victoria had the room tested, and if I recall correctly, it was positive for E. coli. Truly the grossest episode of that show.
So, neglecting to clean up after animals isn't just something that a poor person might do. I mean, having a big-ass nice home implies they likely have some money or came into money somehow.
Story 32. Yeah, I walked into my dealer's house halfway through a raid. Quickest 180 I ever did.
This was over 30 years ago. Wild times.
Story 33. I was a home health aide. One house had the bathtub, sink, and commode filled with feces. The kitchen had rats, mice, and roaches coming and going in the fridge. And they were hoarders. How the hell was I supposed to bathe that woman? I used to put my gloves on before I got to the front door.
That sounds like way past what your job entailed.
Story 34. A bunch of drugs. I've never seen so many pills and weed. At the time, I didn't know that the white substance was cocaine. But I left the moment I noticed all the drugs. Actually, I've never hung out with that friend since that day. I was 15 years old. Story 35. I used to work installing internet with AT&T. I was working in a house in Santa Ana, opening up a phone jack in the kitchen. There was a Pyrex glass baking dish next to me that I wasn't really paying attention to. I finally looked down at it, and the entire thing had maggots crawling around in it. The owner of the house gave me a glass of water without either of us asking. I always felt uncomfortable drinking out of customers' glasses and would usually just take sealed bottles of water. In this case, there was no goddamn way I was drinking out of that glass. I finished the job with failing quality and got the hell out of there. There were houses I would go to, open up their wall jacks, and have dead roaches just fall out of them.
AT&T here, too. Taking the old rotary phones off the wall when the ringer wouldn't work. Always roaches. I just put the old phone in a big plastic bag, put the new phone in, sprayed the bag with roach spray, and tied it on the outside of my truck. Gross. The people were always shocked.
Story 36. I ended up at some unknown house about half an hour outside Boston for the after party when the goth club closed. I was 17 and definitely too young to be at that club to begin with. I started noticing a lot of World War II stuff stashed on shelves and in corners. Accidentally opened the door to what had to have been the host's bedroom while trying to find the bathroom to vomit. A big old flag with a Totenkopf and double S runes above the bed. I guess extra points for not going with just a commonplace swastika? Backed out fast, got to the right room, left several shots worth of bottom shelf whiskey behind, found my ride, and convinced them to leave by telling them my actual age. I was not making good choices at that time, okay? Never knew whose house that was.
Seems to me like the Nazi stuff would have been the correct location for the vomit.
Story 37. Not me, but I was helping a friend move. We got to the point where the furniture was arranged, the table was in place, and a lot of stuff was still in boxes. Neighbors came by to introduce themselves. Middle-aged, cute, very polite women. We were having a great conversation when the mood unexpectedly shifted, and they made every excuse to find the door, but still remained polite. We looked at each other and confirmed that was weird. About 5 minutes later, I noticed a stack of VHS tapes by the TV. Porn. Titles like Busta Bitches and Heat, Debbie Does Downtown, and so on. I was laughing uncontrollably, pointing at the tapes, when he came into the living room. He realized what they had seen and started laughing too. Story 38. I walked in and was punched in the face by a smell I didn't know or recognize, mostly because I've never had cats before. Then I described it to friends, and they told me she probably wasn't cleaning her kitty litter box. I cannot believe to this day how her nose had become numb to that smell that sucker punched me.
Their noses always become numb to that smell. I picked up a dude to go to a movie, and he reeked of that smell, but had no idea. I was like, my guy, you cannot wear that jacket in my car. It's awful.
Story 39. I was probably about 13 years old, excited because I got to stay over at my best friend's house. At the time, that is, we were getting ready for bed. and his mom comes out and starts strapping his nose into some kind of restraint that he was required to wear while sleeping. Honestly, it was like some kind of nose torture device with a cup on the front to hold the nose and leather adjustable straps on the side. "What's that?" ask. Mum replies without missing a beat. "It's to train his big ugly nose so it doesn't grow anymore. We can't have him grow an even bigger and more revolting nose, can we? Then we'd have to chop it off, wouldn't we?" I never stayed over again. And if I could, I wish I'd called home to get picked up out of there. What became of his nose or his mother? I do not know. Story 40. My friend told me this story. She and her boyfriend went to his friend's house to pick him up for a night out. He wasn't quite ready when they got there, so they were waiting in the kitchen and noticed a weird organic scent, like something gone bad. They looked for it everywhere, and finally opened up his cupboard. In there, they found a tray with several rows of Dixie cups, all marked Mike's sperm. They left and never saw him again. Story 41. I went to a friend's house for the first time, and her younger brother's dirty diapers were all over the kitchen and living room floor. It stunk. I pretended that I'd left something at home and ran out of there so fast. Story 42. Unfortunately, a Ku Klux Klan statue on top of their refrigerator. No way I'm getting past that.
Yeah, my dad had a favorite uncle, and when he died, he and my mom helped clean out his house. Inside an old blanket chest, they found his Klan robes and several accounting books logging who'd paid their monthly dues. Uncle had been a treasurer, and the books included the last several mayors, pretty much every cop in town, and most of the civic leaders. Plot twist, this wasn't Alabama or Mississippi, but Upper Michigan. I had no idea the Klan did so well there, but they did. Mom still has the blanket chest.
In certain parts of Europe, hooded figures are celebrated during Christian and Catholic religious holidays. I thought they looked exactly like Ku Klux Klan statues. I'm saying this because there may be a slight chance that the statue you saw was for an Easter celebration. Hopefully it was that.
I lived in Tennessee for years, but never saw more Confederate flags flying than when driving up north in western Michigan.
Story 43. A knife with a ponytail attached to the base from a girl he knew. He made me hold it and asked me to pray.
Please, God, get me out of here alive. No atheists in serial killer lairs.
Story 44. Several years ago, I spontaneously accepted an invite to go fishing with a coworker. At the last minute, the plan changed, and we went to his nephew's house for a crawfish boil. For context, I knew nobody except for my coworker. I show up and immediately notice everyone is shit-faced drunk, and I'm already uncomfortable. They wave us over to the backyard for the boil. In conversation, my coworker congratulates his nephew on now being the man of the house. I was confused. My coworker explained to me that his nephew's dad shot himself in the backyard exactly 2 weeks ago. Yes, the same backyard where we were about to eat crawfish. I swear, it didn't take long for me to pull an Irish goodbye. Story 45. So many candles lit and scented plugins everywhere. Instant migraines for me, so I had to step out. Story 46. Huge spider webs with a spider in the corner of each room. When I alerted my cousins to the spider, they looked at me like I was crazy and said the spiders eat the bugs, as there are little baby roaches crawling over the dishes in the sink. Yeah, my brothers and I got out of there so fast and went back to my grandparents. Story 47. How about smell? My friend opened their front door and it stunk of shit. Couldn't go inside. It was so bad. Story 48. I went to a house. It was messy, hoarder style, but that's not a deal breaker. However, there was a congealed gallon jug of milk on the kitchen table, just sitting there with other food. I could not leave fast enough. Story 49. First time at a friend's house. This was mid-1990s, and the guy and his mom had computers next to each other in the living room. Both were looking up porn on their respective personal computers when I got there. He told me they enjoyed watching porn and hentai together. They had an ISDN line, Integrated Services Digital Network, specifically to support their porn addictions. I noped out of there as fast as I could and never went back. I would have called the police, but he was already 18. Story 50. I'm Hispanic, and in college I worked retail with a very diverse group of people. One night, we went to this super sweet redneck girl's house to drink. Like the whole team. She showed us her room, and right above the bed was a rebel flag and a huge noose. We all left pretty much immediately after. Story 51. I was at a friend's house, and I woke up to his dad naked on the couch. I grabbed my stuff and just walked home without saying a word. Found out the next day he was on drugs and decided to get naked, I guess. Story 52. When I was a kid, I went to a friend's house that had a room with a caving-in ceiling, and I think there was mold. Also, her mom explained to me that there was an empty ice cream bucket under her daughter's bed, because sometimes she and her brother wouldn't make it to the bathroom. I spent the night, though I shouldn't have, and I threw up in the middle of the night. Before that, my sister had spent the night, and she apparently threw up too. Not long after that, my sister and I both had lice. We didn't stay friends with that girl because of all that, and she was mean to a girl a couple of years younger than us. Looking back on it, I just felt bad for her because her parents were known as one of the trashiest couples in our little town. They were obviously neglectful. Story 53. I stopped by to catch up with an old roommate. 10 minutes into our conversation, he put porn on the TV. I got up, left, and never saw him again. Story 54. I walked into the kitchen, and one of their friends was cooking crack in a toaster oven.
As a former crackhead, I can't even fathom how someone would do that.
Story 55. Cat poop and litter everywhere. Hoarder house. It smelled so bad I couldn't breathe. Oh, and bedbugs crawling on the couch and carpet. Story 56. I was hanging out with a group of friends. High school age, but only half still went to school. Some night school kids, some dropouts. We were smoking weed, drinking, cutting school, being completely stupid. Whatever. One of the girls lived nearby and wanted to grab something from home. She invited the 5 of us in. The house smelled horrendous. The floors, all of them, were plywood and had more sand on them than the all-dirt yard outside. There was animal feces and urine soaking into the plywood. The counters were filthy with bugs everywhere. Roaches. And do not pet the dogs, you could see fleas all over them. The girl went into her bedroom to get something, and her mom was lying on her daughter's bed watching TV, picking her nose and eating it and wiping it on her clothes. She said hi to us and tried to shake someone's hand. Mind you, this is when the daughter should have been in school. I bolted. I couldn't breathe in there. I stayed out by the street until at least one other person came out, and it happened to be someone I was actually close with. We bounced without explanation. This was in the 90s. I think I was about 14. Story 57. Domestic violence. I noped right out after giving him a quick backhand. I called the Department of Human Services before I hit the door. Told them I slapped the shit out of him and that if they didn't take him out of the house, he'd be taken out my way. The girlfriend sided with the attacker. I went to jail. He murdered her 3 days later. You can't save them all.
That was, I guess, 8 to 10 years ago. It messed with me for a while. I went to school with a girl. The guy wasn't really family, but was like a step-cousin or something. I honestly don't know. I was there because of my oldest half-brother. It burned it into my head that if an adult doesn't ask me for help, then I shouldn't help. That could be why I only talk to my parents, my son, and my grandchildren today. Please talk to and take care of your people. No one else matters. Honestly, by messing with me for a while, I was convinced my actions led to her death. I now accept that, yes, that's true, but my actions also gave her a way out if she wanted one. So, you can't save them all comes back.
Story 58. I have one weird memory that made me never go back to my friend's house. I was like, I don't know, 7 or 8. I decided to go to my friend's house for the first time. She always came to mine. We were looking for something, I don't know what, and I was following her around, not knowing where stuff was in her house. She opened the door to the bathroom while her older brother was just naked in the shower. She acted like this was totally normal and started searching around in the bathroom while continuing to talk to me like it was normal. He also didn't care. I barely even talked to boys before that, so it made me so wildly uncomfortable. Also, they kept a paddle with holes in it on their wall as a reminder not to act up. My friend said that her parents do use it. It's not for show. I cried so much I called my parents and asked them to come pick me up after 30 minutes, and I never went back. Story 59. In 5th grade, a girl I was friends with had a brother who had schizophrenia. Their cat had just had kittens. He looked at the orange one and decided he didn't like the color of it, and threw the kitten as hard as he could into the wall, killing it instantly. I called my mom, having a panic attack, and told her we could never be friends again. I always feared if he could do that to a kitten, what could he do to a human?
That would be horrendously traumatizing to see, even as an adult.
Story 60. I didn't leave because I was 7, but I came into my best friend's apartment and accidentally tripped on her baby sister, who was randomly placed on the floor near the entryway. She started crying, so the mom picked her up, put her in a dark room, and yelled at her to stop crying. I was spending the night, and they didn't feed me the whole time. We remained friends, but I didn't spend much time there anymore. Story 61. My friend had some giant gun rifle thing on a tripod, sitting on the fireplace hearth. We left quickly. Story 62. Went out with a new female friend for Halloween. We went to her friend's house to pick her up. She was still getting ready, so we had to wait a bit. Her about 5-year-old son decided he had to shit. He saw the baby potty sitting in the middle of the living room, just pulled down his pants, and did his business right in front of us. That kid took an adult-sized shit in that tiny toilet, and the whole room smelled so bad. He just pulled up his pants and ran to his mom to tell her what he did. I had to go sit in the car. Fucking nasty.
Okay, by 5, they should definitely be shitting in an actual toilet.
Story 63. That motherfucker had stolen my Xbox controller. As soon as he went from the living room to his bedroom to get something, I grabbed it and dipped. Story 64. I didn't leave immediately, but I wasn't there for long. The bathroom was disgusting. They had stuff in the tub, and it didn't look like it had been cleaned in years. The inside of the toilet was black with mold. The toilet didn't flush and was full of toilet paper and shit. I bounced and was called a snob because I wanted to go home to use a working toilet that didn't have shit in it. Story 65. She invited me over and everything was going great. The place was a bit sketchy, and then when I went to the bathroom and lifted the toilet seat, Lord, when I tell you I didn't know dirt, buildup, and Satan's fluids could be infused and caked onto a toilet, I bolted. Too gross. If you're reading this, girly, now you know the real reason why, versus, I gotta get home and work. Story 66. I didn't see them, but I heard rats running around and scratching up the walls. It sounded like millions of rats just walking, jumping, scampering, and squeaking continuously. Story 67. I lived in Maine and was invited into someone's house. There was trash everywhere on the floor. Old newspapers, wrappers, old cereal boxes, and so forth. There were pathways from room to room. I was shown to the couch, which was covered in dog hair and stank of wet dog. I should have left, but didn't. There was a bowl of old Cheerios on the coffee table. The Cheerios were soggy, and the top layer had dried to a dark brown. The man's toddler walked up and started eating the Cheerios. That is when I excused myself to leave. Story 68. The first time I went to my now mother-in-law's house was the day before Thanksgiving. We had called to warn her we would not be arriving until 7 or so, since we had both worked and would have stopped to eat dinner already. When we arrived, she had the turkey on the stovetop where she had cooked it that morning. She didn't have room in the fridge, so it sat out all night. I got up in the middle of the night to get water from the kitchen, and the roaches scattered when I turned on the light. I swear I sat up all night wondering what was crawling where and about that turkey sitting on the stove with a towel over it. I still shudder thinking about it.
Oh, this is disgusting. Don't mess with food, ever. Between bugs and food poisoning, no thanks.
Story 69. A middle school friend's dad had a huge snake in a homemade wood and chicken wire cage. I was supposed to sleep over, but I went home instead. And that poor snake. Story 70. So, back in the day, I personally knew Shannon Larrett from BMazine, a body modification website. He used to have these barbecues at his house in Toronto during the summer months, and I used to go to these events. We're talking suspension towers, truck pulls, all sorts of body modification shenanigans. A good friend of mine, who is a tattoo artist, went to university with him and explained why his bathroom was so friggin' gross. Shannon believed that bacteria and infections were encouraged by adding water to dirt, so his bathroom had never been cleaned with water. It literally had piles of dirt in the corner of his bathroom and a shelf full of sounding tools. Google it, but don't blame me for what you find. I backed the fuck out of there so fast and went to a public toilet down the street at a McDonald's. Gross is an understatement. Rest in peace, Shannon.
Yeah, the barbecues were legendary. I discussed doing a suspension with my friend Blair, who had property up in Peterborough, but in a more private spiritual context. Never did go through with it, and can't even remember why at this point. I've definitely seen some wild stuff over the last 56 years. Most of it at ModCon and Shannon's. ModCon was wild.
Holy shit. I'd forgotten about that site. When it was all accessible, I saw some wild shit. So, I'm not as surprised by the story as I should be.
Story 71. I did internet installations for a bit. A guy opened his door, and it was like he'd been partying with Snoop and Willie. Almost a little cloud rolled out when the door opened. Now, I'm not against pot, but I can't show up to the next appointment smelling like it and expect to keep my job. I fudged a negative reading on his fiber and rescheduled. Story 72. I went to see my brother-in-law. His dog got excited and dribbled piss on the floor. He never wiped it up or mopped the floor. When I tried to go to sleep, the overwhelming smell of dog piss and what I can only describe as fried latex balloons was making me nauseous. I woke him up to tell him I needed to stay in a hotel. Story 73. A guy I went on a few dates with. His condo had 2 floors. The front door opened up to the second floor, which was the main floor. It had the kitchen, living room, and dining room. His bedroom and bathroom were downstairs. The lack of air circulation had led to black mold that I spotted as soon as I went to use the bathroom. I didn't go in. I just went right back upstairs and held it in. I said it was getting late and I had to go. I took a deep breath once I got outside. Story 74. I was a teenager in high school and I went over to a friend's house. She had some older dude in the basement putting cocaine into little baggies. This was the first time I'd seen drugs in person. I knew her mom, who was the sweetest, and I didn't think she was that kind of person. It was a shock, and I was like, I forgot. I have to get home. See ya. Story 75. My husband spent the night at a girl's house when he was in middle school because he was going somewhere with her family early the next day. Her dad handcuffed him to the banister behind the sofa he was sleeping on for the night. He would have left, but... Story 76. A strange adult man, too young to be my friend's parent, but too old to be hanging out with 14-year-old girls. My friend had lied about taking me to visit her home, and instead brought me to an online friend's home for her safety. I told her, for her safety, to stop meeting up with older male strangers and next time, don't invite me out. Story 77. I saw some family members, and they nonchalantly asked if I wanted to partake in hard drugs. I left 10 minutes later, thinking, what the hell is wrong with these people? Then I went to my hotel room, slept for an hour, and continued my trip. After that, I wanted nothing to do with anyone outside my family. Story 78. I saw a copy of Mein Kampf on the bookshelves of an old German man. I was visiting his house because of his hot granddaughter-in-law. He was in the living room when I spotted the book on the shelf. I hardly spoke any German at all, and he didn't speak English. I pulled it out and looked over at him. He looked back at me, and we just stood there for a minute, looking at each other across a gulf of decades, smoke, fire, and blood, each wishing we could communicate with the other. I put the book back. Things didn't work out with the granddaughter-in-law.
It's the diary or manifesto of a madman, which is interesting on certain levels. In fact, knowing how his mind worked could prevent something similar in the future if people actually paid attention. Anyway, owning a copy doesn't make someone a Nazi, nor does it mean they admired Hitler in any way, even if he was German.
As a history nerd, I've always wanted to get a copy for educational purposes. However, I wouldn't keep it on the shelf with other books. That one's going to have to be stored somewhere out of sight.
Good on you for calling him out. Sometimes you can get your point across without saying a word.
Story 79. She left a bloody period pad just out in the open on the bathroom counter. and she was my cousin.
Oh, gross. Likely an embarrassing accident. That is, she got distracted while cleaning up and forgot to dispose of it. But still gross. I had a housemate who left her bloody, messy pads and tampons on top of the rest of the garbage in the bathroom for everyone to see and smell. Arguably not quite as bad as forgetting on the counter, but the worst part was I had to argue with her to get her to make even the most minimal effort to wrap up and cover the used menstrual products. Like, I'm as concerned about the environment and as budget conscious as the next person, but she seemed to think it was a mortal sin to use any toilet paper to dispose of things properly. She refused to change until I got all of our housemates to weigh in, and they all awkwardly pointed out how disgusting, smelly, and unacceptable it was. That was just the tip of the iceberg. I could not wait to get out of that living situation.
Story 80. Met a girl on Tinder, and after a few weeks of schedules not matching up, she texted me to come over at 11 p.m. to Netflix and chill. I pulled up to her home, which had no lights on outside, and there were two guys on the side of her house smoking. I left so quickly, and she never asked why I didn't show up. I think I dodged something that was about to go south very quickly. Story 81. I don't leave, but after seeing the state of the stovetop at a party, I didn't eat any of the food that wasn't brought in by someone else. Story 82. The first and last time I stayed at my ex's parents' place. Dog shit on the floor. I don't know how it didn't bother them. Story 83. A client's house. He has a flea infestation so bad you could see groups of them on the floor. Story 84. A house full of empty food wrappers and dishes stacked everywhere. I couldn't stay. Story 85. I didn't actually go into that house. A neighbor down the block lived in a huge house. Whenever I walked by, she was looking out the small window of her door. Just her face fit perfectly in the frame. She was always there. Anytime you walked past, she was just looking out, and it looked like she was saying something. Her lips were moving. I worked at a supermarket and sometimes had to walk past her house at 2 a.m., and she was there. It was so damn creepy and weird. My friends and I were convinced she was a witch. I don't think any Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts selling anything ever made it into her front gate. She had a creepy old lady face too. I haven't been in that neighborhood in over 30 years, but I wouldn't be surprised if I went there now and she was still in the window. Though it appears, based on Google Maps, the door looks different now. And I'm relieved she didn't appear in the Google Maps Street View. Sorry, probably not the answer this post was exactly looking for, but I highly doubt anyone made it into the front gate. Story 86. Two dudes were just blatantly shooting heroin in the living room as I walked in. Story 87. Yeah, a few times for various reasons. The most notable was walking through the front door to see a swastika flag and some Nazi propaganda in their living room. No thanks. Turned around and left. Never spoke to them again. Story 88. As a brown person in the South, seeing Ku Klux Klan robes and literature at a neighborhood kid's home should have made 6-year-old me leave immediately. However, with all the other people in the neighborhood being white, they accepted them as one of their own. And, as the new kid in the neighborhood, not knowing what the Ku Klux Klan or racism was, and desperately wanting to fit in, I didn't leave. Now that I'm an adult, I realize that most white Americans will stand with their racist white friends before any people of color. And yes, I'm definitely getting the fuck out of this racist, fascist shithole as quickly as I can.
Oh my God. And when you went home and told your parents about the decor, that's just sick that you were subjected to that. What's sicker is that it was there for you to be subjected to. Christ, I'm sorry. Which is absolutely useless and meaningless, but still true.
Story 89. I went over to my coworker's new apartment. She had recently relocated. She drove up in her own car, and the moving company was a few days behind. She had packed the absolutely necessary items for those few days without her stuff. I peeked in the closet and found a life-size cardboard cutout of Donald Trump. Needless to say, I never went back. Story 90. Taxidermy of exotic and threatened, not quite endangered animals. I was a kid, though, so I had to put up with them staring at me until my parents were ready to leave. Story 91. In my early 20s, a long time ago, I went to a girl's house, her parents' house, to pick her up for our first date. There were piles of dirty clothes all over the floor, a semi-hoarding situation. That first date was also our last, because she didn't seem bothered by it at all.